that was probably it. So I clicked it, downloaded it. We can go to that now. All right, so this is the article that I'm presuming this is the one that they're referring to, because they didn't use the title or any of the names or page numbers. It was just issue number. So I'm assuming this is it. So let's just read this real quick. Although isoflavones such as those found in soy have been shown to inhibit breast cancer in laboratory studies, association between consumption of isoflavone-containing foods and breast cancer have been inconsistent in epidemiological studies. Epidemiology, I think, is the study of causes of diseases. We evaluated the relationship between isoflavone consumption and breast cancer risk among women in the Japanese public health blah 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 methods. In January 1990, 21,852 Japanese female residents from 4 public health center areas completed a self-administered questionnaire which included items about the frequency of soy consumption through December 1999, and 209,354 person-years of follow-up. 179 women were diagnosed with breast cancer. Cox proportional hazards regression was used to estimate the relative risks and 95% confidence intervals for breast cancer in relation to consumption of miso soup. I don't know what that means. Soy foods and estimated isoflavone. All statistical tests were two-sided results. Consumption of miso soup and isoflavones, but not of soy foods, was inversely associated with the risk of breast cancer. Okay? Inversely associated meaning the more miso soup the person ate, the less risk, right? The associations did not change substantially after adjustment for potential confounders. I take this potential confounders to be, other factors that could be contributing to this apparent correlation. It's not an apparent correlation, but be kind of interference. So, in other words, in other words, this is referring to the fourth premise of the causal argument. Excuse me. Son of a gun. So I take this to be referring to the potential confounders. I take that to be referring to these two, E1 and E2, miso soup consumption and the risk of breast cancer being just coincidentally correlated, when in fact, it might be something like the potential confounders including reproductive history, family history, smoking, and other dietary factors. So these other kind of more complicating factors which could be contributing to the risk of breast cancer, or reduced risk of breast cancer. Compared with those in the lowest quartile of isoflavone intake, which means people who are eating the least soy and miso products, roughly, the adjusted what is our relative risks for breast cancer for women in the second, third, and highest quartiles were, so let's see here, 76.9, 0.46. I don't really. Anyways, the inverse association was stronger in postmenopausal women. Conclusion: in a population-based prospective cohort study in Japan, frequent miso soup and isoflavone consumption was associated with a reduced risk of breast cancer. So I take it without knowing what all this kind of confidence intervals and relative risk numbers that they're talking about, without knowing what these things mean, and just roughly understanding the language that they're using, I think they are saying that miso soup consumption is linked with up to 50% reduced risk of breast cancer, and that there's a causal argument going on in here, that these two are correlated, and the other piece of evidence that seems to be that they're demonstrating is that, to some extent at least, is that the miso soup consumption and the reduced risk of breast cancer are not coincidentally correlated, by pointing out these potential confounders, or that they were controlled for. There's no third cause. From my quick glance, I didn't notice anything. I don't know if it would really make sense. Something that's some third cause that's causing that, independent of the miso, there's some third cause that's causing people to eat miso soup, and yet is also causing this reduced risk of breast cancer. So it's just there's just an apparent causal relationship between them, but in fact there's not a causal relationship. That doesn't really make sense. It also doesn't make sense to say that reduced risk of breast cancer causes people to eat miso soup. Yeah. So premise 2 and 3 appear to be assumed and unstated, and the conclusion being that miso soup consumption is a cause of 50% reduced risk of breast cancer. Well, let me say one more thing about that. Excuse me while I flip through these. If you'll notice, this here says reduced risk of breast cancer, right? But if you look at the title of this article, they're quite specifically referring to Japan in this. Reduced risk of in Japan. I think I was looking at the discussion here. Yeah. And I think the inspiration for this discussion was that women in Japan have a much lower incidence of breast cancer, and so this was obviously a possible explanation for it. Anyways, it is fairly specific in the article that they're not extending it to all women exactly. Of course hopefully that would be that's the point of it, and that's the inference that people would be making from it. But I think since they're being scientific, they're they're not, they don't want to, you don't want to go too far beyond the evidence you have. So, anyways, that's the standardization. I think. Stay tuned or check out Be My True Premises Test, youtube.com/Be My True Premises Test, for a video about evaluating this argument about miso soup consumption. Thank you.
What do you know about an argument? What do I do with these? Come on, let's standardize with